So it is my great pleasure to introduce today the congressman for this district where our Ethical Society is located. The Ethical Society does not take stands on particular candidates or parties, but we do understand that how we organize public life, that is politics, is of profound importance in being able to actualize our values of human worth, human dignity, and human connection. And so it's important to hear what our representative in Congress is working on and to figure out how we as individuals can be involved in the work of democracy. Jamaal Bowman spent 20 years in the educational system here in New York City as a middle school principal most recently, and before that as a teacher, and always an advocate for public education. His approach, as he has said, to teaching and administration was grounded in service, love, and empowering every person. His approach to representing his district in Congress comes from that same grounding. He represents communities in the Bronx, in Yonkers, and other parts of Westchester County. In Congress, he serves as vice chair of the House Committee on Education and Labor and as chair of the subcommittee on energy on the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. This summer, he introduced groundbreaking legislation, the Green New Deal for public schools, which would transform public education, help heal the harm of generations of poverty and trauma, add jobs, and treat the climate crisis as the emergency that it is, all issues which many members of this society support. And we will have some time, I hope, at the end for questions and responses. And remember when you're making those at the end to make them brief. So welcome, Congressman Bowman, and to our online and in-person space here today.
Hey, y'all. How you doing? Good morning. Thank you for the intro. How's everyone doing? Really good to see your faces. Really good to be with you all. So I was asked to come and speak to the state of our democracy and how things are going in Congress. So the short answer is we're in good shape. I say that a bit apprehensively, but I believe that we are. As you know, we're negotiating the Build Back Better Act. And depending upon how these negotiations go, it could be transformative for the entire country. The fact that we're even in this moment at a place where we are in a position to negotiate is because of the progressive movement in this district to help me get into office, but also across the country. That in a way in which, leadership in Congress is now aligning itself with the Progressive Caucus, leadership like Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer, as well as President Biden. So the CPC, we were the caucus that held firm and was very, very clear. No climate, no deal. If we're not going to go as big as possible on climate, then we are going to have to remain at the table to negotiate. If we're not going to go bigger on racial equity and racial justice, if we're not going to go bigger on the care economy, particularly home care and child care specifically, then we're not going to have a deal. So because of that, because we were able to hold the line, we are now in a place of negotiation. Now, the top line number at the beginning of this, the most recent top line number was 3.5 trillion. The top line number at the very beginning, when Senator Sanders was running for president, was 12 to 16 trillion to truly deal with the climate catastrophe that we are in. Between the Sanders and Biden coalition, or within that coalition, after Biden received the Democratic nomination, that negotiation came down to 6 trillion. In terms of what needed to be invested. 3.5 is the negotiation from the human infrastructure side. And now, as I'm sure many of you have heard, Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema in particular, Senators Manchin and Sinema in particular, continue to push back on that number. They want 1.5. They don't want to raise taxes on corporations, don't want to expand Medicare, Most recently, Senator Manchin came out speaking against the climate provisions. So it's really important that progressives have led the way. It's really important for people to know progressives have led the way, but the majority of the Democratic caucus and Democrats in Congress support the $3.5 trillion plan. It is being held up by 2 senators and a handful in the House. And I can't even say a handful in the House because, you know, they were just pushing to have the infrastructure bill passed first. It wasn't that they were against the 3.5 trillion. The reason why we do support the infrastructure bill, we do support it, but we didn't want to push that first because we couldn't trust Sinema and Manchin to move forward with the 3.5. We knew that they were going to try to chop it down, which is what they're currently doing, even though they voted in support of the 3.5 trillion when it came out of the Senate over to the House. So we are still in negotiation. I know the most recent deadline, or the latest deadline that the speaker mentioned, was October 31st. Initially, I was optimistic we would be done by that date. I would say right now, I'm not sure that's going to be the case. I don't think that is the worst thing in the world because, again, this is a negotiation. And we're trying to make sure that this time we don't leave climate behind, we don't leave women behind, children behind, our seniors behind, and kick the issue of racial justice and racial equity down the road. This is our biggest piece of legislation since the New Deal. And the New Deal, as you all know, left people of color behind. It redlined communities. It's why redline communities suffer the most from upper respiratory illness, comorbidities, and die disproportionately from COVID. And we have to address that, you know, and our Green New Deal for public schools is a part of it. It's not the full investment we wanted in the bill. What was the annual? I think it was somewhere north of 400 billion. We were asking to be invested in this bill. It's at 86 billion, which is far short, but at least it's focused on public schools and retrofitting and redesigning our public schools to be climate resilient. And we all know we're going to have to go back to the table in terms of, and stay at the table in terms of climate, because, you know, Hurricane Ida is indicative of what's going to be more consistent in our country. I mean, Hurricane Ida, I think it's a really scary tale of how, you know, this is a storm that hit the Gulf and then made its way to the Northeast. And when it got here, it was initially described as a tornado, and then it became a flash flood, and it literally destroyed parts of this district. I don't know if any of you had a chance to, you know, go to Rye or Pelham or Mamaroneck. It killed people, it destroyed houses of worship and businesses and all of that. So, you know, regardless of how some of my colleagues, you know, are trying not to go big on climate, you know, it's time to do so. And as you all know, Mr. Manchin is, you know, has a huge coal industry in his state. And he is supported by the fossil fuel industry, and that's part of his resistance. The same thing when it comes to Senator Sinema in the pharmaceutical industry. So it's important to call that out and have honest conversations about that very publicly, which if you've seen me on TV, I've tried to do, because they've been trying to flip it as if, you know, it's about inflation or it's about, you know, entitlement, which I do think that particularly Manchin believes that we're becoming an entitlement society. And what I've tried to communicate in others is like, well, you know, Senator, we've left these communities behind. And that's why not only they're suffering, but the country is suffering. And if we invest in everyone equitably, the country will do better equitably. But it's hard to get that through the heads of some. So that's what's happening within the Democratic Party. The Republican Party is a party that's doubling down on Trumpism, is doubling down on fascism, and it doesn't care about democracy. It's holding on to white supremacy. They did not want to investigation into January 6th. They pushed back and resisted that. They do not want to pass voting rights. You see, they are, undermining voting rights across the country. They, are taking away a woman's right to choose what to do with her body. And they just want control and power. And even some on that side continue to call for violence and even civil war, potentially. This is how much they are holding on to their so-called democratic values, right? Their values, they say it's democracy, but it's about purity, so-called purity and power and control. And it's even manifesting locally in some school boards with the pushback against critical race theory and diversity, equity, and inclusion. I watched a video of a local school board meeting just the other day where one of the parents said that the diversity, equity, and inclusion program is not what it seems like. It's actually Marxism and communism. And it goes against, it's against God and Christian values. Like it was really interesting to say the least what she was saying, but that's where the Republican Party seems to be. So, it's essential for Democrats to deliver on not just the Build Back Better Act, but voting rights. That's another key piece. And we're also pushing immigration and gun reform as two other key pieces. What's positive developments in terms of voting rights, we passed HR 1 in the House. It sat in the Senate for a long time. And Senator Manchin himself has submitted a revision that, according to the CPC, isn't terrible. It does get us to a lot of places we need to be. And I could get those details to you at a later date. But so that's a good sign, because in theory, Senator Manchin will be able to get 10 Republicans to sign on and support this. But we'll see. Either way, as you all know, we're pushing to end the filibuster as well, because it's racist, it's old, and it doesn't allow us to govern accordingly. So yeah, that's some of the state of play. I think Democrats, we need to do a much better job with our overall communication strategy, because Republicans are really good at weaponizing our own words against us and playing it over and over again on repeat, so it gets into the subconscious of voters, particularly Republican voters, and paints Democrats as this monster, socialist, radical, leftist, entitlement party, and they get to mask their racism underneath that, and win elections as a result. We have to do a much better job of communicating exactly what we're doing and exactly what we've done. And I think, and we've talked about this in our caucus, we haven't communicated effectively enough how much we try to do and have done with the American Rescue Plan. Like, the American Rescue Plan is a big piece of legislation that had rent relief, that had $130 billion for K-12 education, and so many other provisions. The child tax credit, we lifted 50 million children out of poverty, and now we're trying to make it permanent. But those provisions have been very powerful, and we have been pushing the child tax credit. And we might have a big event, big event in the district this week. So stay tuned. If it's happening, I'll make sure to let you all know. It would be the biggest that we've done. But we should communicate everything we've done with the American Rescue Plan to voters as well. So the goal is communicate effectively what we've done with the American Rescue Plan, what we're going to do now with the Build Back Better Act, deliver transformative results to the people of this country, and then hopefully maintain the majority in 2022, which I think is possible. I do not think that's an impossibility. And yeah, a couple other points I want to make before I take questions. So we have one major piece of legislation that we're really excited about, that we're hoping to make part of the Build Back Better Act. And it's one of the offsets or pay-fors So we've been working with Senator Van Hollen's office on a polluters pay climate fund bill, which targets the biggest contributors to pollution, to climate pollution over the last 20 years. We've identified about 30 companies. The majority of them are foreign companies, which is interesting. And they would pay into a fund to clean up what they've polluted. It's not a carbon tax. It's not about future taxes on what they earn. It's about the pollution that they've contributed to. There's been studies that have documented very specifically their contribution to climate change, and they would pay commensurate to their contribution. That can raise will raise at least 500 billion over the next 10 years and could raise up to $1 trillion. And it's not a cost that can be passed down to consumers, which is why people like it. It doesn't go after the coal industry specifically, which is why Manchin doesn't hate it. and it targets mostly foreign companies, which is why leadership is considering it right now as potentially part of the Build Back Better Act. And even the Senate, Senator Schumer shared a framework for what 2.5 trillion in the act could look like, and in it he has polluters pay as part of it. So that's exciting, and it would be really helpful if this group engaged with Senator Schumer's office and Senator Gillibrand's office to share your support for the Polluters Pay Climate Fund. We can share the link to the text. We haven't introduced it yet, but we will soon. But we can share the link so you know what's in it, and that could be huge, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to have the pay-fors, which again, if we have pay-fors, you can't also argue against the price tag, because the price tag is going to come down if we have pay-fors. But what's happening is they're also arguing against the pay-fors. So they don't want to. Senator doesn't want to raise corporate tax, and Manchin doesn't want to do certain things. So that's what's happening. And some people throughout the district have lobbied us to support the hard infrastructure bill, and live to fight another day on a human infrastructure bill. And then I've seen rhetoric about like, well, progressives have to compromise. Progressives have to compromise. I'm like, wait a minute, why are you saying we have to compromise? Why are we saying Manchin has to compromise? Why is it being put on us? And especially because when he's been unreasonable. And in a district like ours, you see the contrast, you see the privilege and the poverty. You see how, we have tens of thousands of people in our district suffering from lack of housing security, no investments in public housing, poor pay and benefits for care workers. Like, it's right here in our district, and we always want to kick the can down the road for them and for people of color and women and the poor, but not for anyone else. And to me, that's unacceptable. And finally, on this point, 90% of the jobs in the infrastructure bill will go to white men. That's just how that's designed. And again, everybody else will be left out, just like the New Deal. The last thing I want to say, and I promise I'll stop here before taking questions, is the issue of community violence is something that our office has been doing a lot of work around over the last several weeks, particularly in Yonkers and Mount Vernon and the 47th precinct in the Bronx. Incredible numbers in terms of per capita violence and per capita gun violence. So it's something that we're dealing with and we have to deal with. And for those of you who know me and my background and follow me, you know that I take a holistic approach in dealing with this issue. As a former educator, I look at it from this perspective of children and families, and what I'm talking to law enforcement about, and social services and behavioral health and community organizations about. We're trying to build a coalition to deal with these issues collaboratively. And what we know and what we've learned is the majority of the young people who are committing acts of violence are people who have been identified as, our children who have been identified as having special needs in our schools. And one of the things I've spoken to both senators about and the governor is we have to support our schools in doing better in meeting the needs of children with special needs while in school. And that will dramatically decrease the possibility of an increase in violence later on. And also our approach right now needs to be both clinical and educational, not just carceral. Because carceral at best responds after the fact. We are trying to prevent these things from happening in the first place. And there's a lot of, and we're building some infrastructure around that as well. So I'll stop there and take questions. But overall, it's, good stuff. It's, many in this district for many, many years did not feel like they were a part of the conversation and a part of our democracy and a part of, changing things. And now they feel like they're a part of it and excited. So that's, I'm very humbled by that and looking forward to the work ahead. So thank you.